Welcome to Societal Shapers, a podcast by PL Kadila, the place to get inspired, find your purpose and courage, and get tools to become the next female leader, creating real results and meaningful changes. Hi, welcome to the Societal Shapers podcast. Today, I'm your host, PL Kadila, and my guest is Khairun Zabidi. So Khairun leads the UK's International Climate Fund, ICF, in Malaysia via the UK Partnerships for Accelerated Climate Transition's UK PAC program. She has over 12 years of experience in corporate responsibility, sustainability reporting and standards, ESG strategy and integration, as well as capacity building for the mitigation and adaptation of climate change for the private, public, and third sector. In a past life, Khairun lobbied the UNFCCC negotiations as a climate youth activist, practiced CSR in corporate Malaysia, founded an equal opportunity zero-waste social enterprise, and consulted high-profile corporate clients on future-proofing their businesses with PwC's Southeast Asia Sustainability Consulting practice. And as a sustainability practitioner, connector and coach with an exceptionally broad range of experiences, Khairun considers herself as a catalyst and cross-pollinator of sustainability solutions and is drawn to opportunities that promise high transformational change and impact potential. So I'm very happy to have Khairun today on our podcast. Khairun, welcome. Please share a little bit more about what you're currently doing.
Thanks a lot, Pial, for having me on your show. Really pleased to be talking to your audience about something that I feel very passionate about, and I think conversation that doesn't happen in the mainstream as much as it should. So I lead a UK PAC, I lead a program called the UK PAC, which is part of the UK government's international climate commitments to help emerging economies decarbonize. So we discovered that the climate crisis, about the climate crisis as a humankind, maybe in the 80s. So the Rio summit in 92 was the first time the UN community came together to address this. Part of that, so it led to the Kyoto Protocol, which expired in 2014, 2015, and gave birth to the Paris. Well, the Copenhagen Agreement was meant to be that meant to deliver us a strong climate agreement, but we failed. But the Paris Agreement, which looked at having every country in the world commit to their own nationally determined contributions, allowed us to unblock some of the difficult legal constraints that basically made it difficult for us to move forward to agree on something on climate change. So the fact that Biden has now won a couple of days ago was when the US officially left the Paris Agreement, making it the only country that wasn't part of that commitment. And the first thing that Biden will do is recommit the US to it, together with over $3 trillion US dollars, I think, which is great for the space. So part of that agreement was for developing countries to support emerging economies like Malaysia decarbonize. So we were meant to be moving 10 billion US dollars a year by 2020. So that was this year. We're not going to know if we hit it until 2 years from now, but part of the fund that I manage is part of that commitment from the UK government, which flows through different bodies, of course, through multilateral bodies, but also unilaterally or bilaterally with countries. So this is the first fund of its kind in Malaysia. It's about £2.5 million in technical assistance, which we're meant to spend by the end of next year. So I spent the last year sort of writing a strategy to look at where the key investments we should be making in climate change, but more critically, where the themes of investments that we should be supporting so that we can deliver something very strong, provide that strong support that Malaysia needs. So very broadly, where the PAC program will be investing in the next year would be in three broad buckets. So we're looking at the energy theme. We'll be looking at unlocking barriers for a whole systems approach. So we've got lots of different sort of pockets of investments in renewable energy and hydrogen. We're looking at offshore wind, solar, but what is the whole systems approach in terms of the investments we're making? How do these investments and these strategies actually lead to a whole systems change when it comes to the energy sector's contribution to decarbonization? So we're keen to look at unlocking those. We would be looking at green finance, and this is very promising as well because, again, unlocking barriers for green finance flows, both in the private and public sector. So very pleased to hear the Minister of Finance's announcement a couple of days ago. You may have heard that a green bond is in the works, as well as a roadmap to a national green finance roadmap. So all that is part of the work that we've been doing with the Ministry of Finance over the last 6 weeks. So really pleased to hear it go official. It's part of what the UK PAC program will be supporting through technical assistance. So the UN, as mentioned by the Minister, will be delivering this work and will be which will be funded by the PAC program. So really pleased to hear how the government's making these sort of commitments. And green finance is going to be another second theme of the program. And the third theme is a climate action and enabling environment. What this looks like was, through the consultations we've had, we've realized that one of the key areas or barriers for Malaysia to decarbonize is actually governance, where we've got a target. We want to, 45% emissions intensity reduction. But what does that mean in terms of responsibilities for the private sector, but also the government? That's not clear at this time. How do we harness the energy of civil society, of businesses, to be able to contribute to Malaysia's collective emissions reduction? So a lot of what we'll be looking at would be, as part of the climate action and enabling environment, would be things like policy. One of the earliest things that we were looking at to support during Minister Yin's time before the government change was actually developing a climate change act, which is still on the table. We're looking at helping the Malaysian Green Tech Centre transition into a climate change centre, and how can we do that effectively and provide the technical assistance for that. We're also broadly looking at governance and helping businesses come together and look at how they can contribute to this target that we have as a country, but also mobilizing civil societies such as the youth sector, as well as civil sectors like cities or municipalities or communities to be able to move those financial flows of ICF from a national level down to a lower sort of grassroots level. So yeah, broadly, that's kind of what I do. And yeah, it's really exciting work, and really looking forward to when we actually kick off. So we've just closed our expression of interest window. So we'll be closing on Monday, actually. So we'll start looking at it, the proposals coming through, and I think selecting projects that we'll be funding over the next year or so.
Wow, that is a lot, and that sounds very exciting. I think you've done a great job at kind of breaking down all the focus sectors and the work that you do, and it's an exciting time for Malaysia, right? So as you're saying all of this, I'm quite interested to know, where does Malaysia stand in terms of our commitments with the other Southeast Asian countries? How are we doing?
Okay, so I think one of the things, or the hallmarks of what's been really difficult for Malaysia over the last year or so, is actually political instability. I think this is why policy is so important, right? It gives us a direction. Why is it so important that the US needs to sign up to things like, the Paris Agreement? It's because it gives, it sends out market signals for us to follow, right? So similarly in Malaysia, where's that direction that's not clear because of that political instability? And as a result of that, really, we've got some very strong institutions. Like, we've got a very strong central bank, our financial institutions very solid. Our political institutions are not as, we don't have that sort of kind of strong base that we stand on compared to our neighbors like Singapore. So for instance, the green finance sector in Indonesia is a lot more invigorated than ours. So they've got a number of green bonds already, and some are in the works. We don't have one yet. So a lot of the green bonds, sustainability bonds that have been issued are coming from the private sector. So our private sector is mobilizing a lot more sort of movement than our government sector. So in terms of that, that's one feature of the Malaysian movement. Our corporate sector is really leading the way in terms of action. So even if you look at our corporate commitments, our corporate sustainability commitments, we launched a silver book. Khazanah launched a silver book in 2006, which required companies to start disclosing their CSR commitments. And then in 2015, 2016, that's when we started requiring companies to disclose our sustainability commitments. And while this is all good, I think we're one of the first stock exchanges to make this requirement. But our neighbors have caught up much faster than us. So for instance, Singapore has targets. It requires companies to set targets, sustainability targets, in a way that we don't require at this time. Singapore has also launched a carbon price at a very low price. I think it's like $5 per piece per ton of carbon. And I think it only involves about 14 or 15 companies at this time, but they would be able to ratchet this up very quickly in 4 or 5 years, or even 2 or 3 years, because companies are now comfortable calculating carbon in their books in a way that Malaysia is very far away from doing. So you can see how, while the corporate sector is very ambitious and able to respond to some of the challenges that's coming from their investors, that's coming from supply chains, that's coming in from consumers, but it requires strong regulation to be able to be a lot more ambitious or come together to address a target that's sort of nationally set. Similar things happening in other parts of the world. You'll see places like Indonesia, they've got biodiversity banks that function. They've got payment of ecosystem services that function as a result of that. You see countries like Vietnam and Cambodia really come up with a lot stronger stance. I mean, the Philippines, for instance, they're going to be hit by climate. One of the key areas for resilience, there's a lot of work happening there as a result of that, because of the risks that they face compared to us. We're not exposed to the type of risks that countries like the Philippines face. So you do see governments shifting because their risk factor and the exposure to climate risk is higher than others. For us, it's more, we will see that the issues trickling down for us would look like food security is going to be a big one for us, water security, our ability to adjust to the rising sea levels in some parts of the country. What does it mean legally for people? Our markets are going to be affected a lot. The value of money, our social systems are going to be affected as a result of the changing climate, but also peace and stability in the region is going to be definitely going to affect us. So I think the biggest hit for us would be in those areas, but we don't have the science that tells us that to that sort of granular level. And we're seeing markets shift. So our central bank had just put together a joint committee on climate change last year, and it's requiring companies to look at their risk exposures of their portfolios to climate risk. So, for instance, how much coal we're invested in that would end up becoming stranded assets, where people are now shifting to renewables, and then the coal power plants wouldn't, in terms of financing, it becomes a stranded asset in the books of our banks. But similarly, should banks be funding development plans without looking at risks, climate risks? So Klang, they say, a big part of Klang would be at risk of flooding, and therefore there's a lot of questions on whether or not banks should be financing that. But also, it's a question of deforestation as well. Malaysia is one of those last few bastions of the world that have the remaining lungs of the world. So there's a lot of financial flows. At least Shell has just signed on a 60-year agreement with the state of Pahang and Sarawak for carbon offsets. So we're seeing some movement, but again, it's all driven by the private sector as opposed to the government sector, which does put us at a bit of a disadvantage compared to our neighbors.
I think that's also very insightful, and it's great to hear there's a lot of positive developments that's kind of happening at the moment. But then again, going back to the points which we discussed slightly earlier, that there's the private sector is driving it, and therefore we need a lot more of policy surrounding it, institutions to strengthen. So tell us a bit more about this part, right? The lack of the political will, so to speak. What is it that we need? So one of the points that you brought up is this instability of our government, because we keep changing and all of that. So they've got their drama and all that. But in terms of a vision for Malaysia, I have not kind of seen this anywhere. But what is that vision for Malaysia in the next 10, 15, 30, 50 years from a green perspective?
We don't have one, actually. So I think the best we have is the SDGs. So the government has committed to achieving the SDGs by 2030. We have seen some work invested in the SDGs. It is not moving as fast as it must be. The numbers that we have are outdated. We've heard this in the news where they're saying that, you say our poverty level is at this rate, but really is that relative to today's standards? No, it's not. Yeah. But speaking at a very climate focus, right? The reason why we're not able to shift, it's because of awareness, one. So broadly, politicians aren't aware of the issues surrounding climate change. And if you look at who's responsible for our climate portfolio today, you have questions on whether or not how much experience the politicians actually have to be able to make decisions related to resourcing, related to direction, related to ambition. So without having that strong political will to be able to understand what the problems are and where that fits in terms of that trajectory of where we need to go, it makes it very difficult to respond. So the second thing, very, to sort of to build onto that, is the short-termism, the nature of short-termism in politics. So unless you've got very long-serving politicians, and we know we've got some in Malaysia, where we know that they will end up somewhere if cards are played right. But generally, there are some politicians that, as a youth activist, I had invested in relationships with, knowing that they would remain in the system for the next 20, 30 years. It's up to those those kind of politicians to be able to take that on. But other politicians are a lot more short term. I'm only in power for the next 4 to 5 years. I'm only minister for 4 to 5 years, and therefore I want to be able to create impact as much as I can in that short term way without having to think about what the country needs in 30 or 40 years. So the nature of how we've built our governance systems has resulted in that sort of thinking. And then the third thing is that our bureaucrats, while they are, there's lots that are very qualified and competent, but the way we've structured our bureaucratic system and our administrative system doesn't allow for us to staff our ministries to be able to address what we need. So the climate change ministry, very simply, they've got maybe at best 5 to 10 people working on climate change. In the UK, we've got the ministry I work for we've got an entire ministry that looks at climate change. We've got people who are economists, we've got policymakers, we've got energy experts, we've got finance experts, we've got very skilled, technically skilled civil servants to be able to craft policy and be able to respond to some of the demands that's coming from the civil society, that's coming from the taxpayer, that's coming from your voter, in a way that we are not able to respond to. So I remember when we changed government and the pandemic had just hit us, a very simple feature was that our civil servants were not able to work remotely. There wasn't a system. They didn't have an
infrastructure
to be able to work digitally. So it meant that we weren't able to connect to our counterparts in government. It meant that work became much slower for us. And then, because there was a new government change at the same time, that, needing to set up a new government from scratch, a new ministry from scratch, needing to learn the portfolio and what that means, and then brief ministers. So that sort of instability really does lead to, does hinder a lot of progress. So, lack of awareness, that is that short-termism thinking, but also a bureaucratic system that isn't structured or designed to be able to deliver what the goods we need to respond to climate change.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up some of these challenges that we face, right? And it's for the audience who's listening in to be able to understand these challenges, and then find ways of how can you then play a part or play a role in helping to overcome these challenges. So I want to bring you back to like the area, 2 points on the system, which is talent and then corruption. So we'll start with talent. So we recently had the budget 2021 announced, and in terms of the budget allocation, we know that the highest portion of the budget is going to go to the Ministry of Education for them to, I hope, rehaul our education system, but in what manner, we don't know. So that's, again, questionable. So when it comes to talent, right, so you mentioned we only have like 5-6 people working on the climate change team, versus what it is abroad or in the UK. Now, bringing it back to the provision of jobs, right, and unemployment and all of that. So every time I read the news, I hear that Malaysia is trying to get into this move away from manufacturing and into the services. And one of the things which I see the government spending a lot of time, money, and effort is to digitize our economy, right? So we talk about digitizing the people, which basically means getting people onto an e-commerce platform, or just basically getting people online. Having a website does not provide jobs. So, these are the kind of fundamentals which I challenge the government in terms of, where their priorities and where their focus is. So like you just mentioned, we can see there's a clear gap in this particular industry. So why are we not already channeling these kinds of things? You don't have to do an entire degree to be an expert. So recently there was an announcement made by UOB in Singapore to say that UOB is starting a sustainability school for them, for internal, for the bank itself. You know, on that same note, why can't we start a sustainability school, right, for the masses to just learn what it means, right? If you want to have mindsets and behavioral changes, you need to first educate your people. And going back to some of the points which you said, we do feel climate changes in pockets of the parts in Malaysia, but in general, if I'm in KL and I'm an urbanite and I'm middle income, I don't really feel it. Right, from the crisis of fresh water, from food supply chains being disrupted, because I can get my food on Grab. I have plentiful of water from supplied by my condo. So the majority of the M40s are probably not feeling it, and the voices of the M40s and above are what that matters, and then it builds that part of the voices of civil society. So going back into talent, what are the initiatives, things which you are looking at? So there's investments that you're looking at, pockets of investments, like, okay, let's invest in these projects under the energy, under renewable energy, green financing, etc., etc. But what about talent, Khairun?
Okay, so I think there are two things that I think we have to arrive at here. So with talent, it's first of all what the market wants and what the market needs, right? And the second thing is then resourcing. It's like, first, have we fulfilled, is there demand for this work? And secondly, do we have the talent, the skill set to be able to fit it in? So in the first bit, I think too many Malaysians still don't have their basic needs met. So that made, I think a lot of the work is being put into that. And I think it's very easy for us to say, yes, we don't feel it because we're middle income. Our focus is elsewhere, right? Like what our needs are is somewhere else. And if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you say that, certain needs to be met before you reach to the point of self-actualization that you and I are at. We are educated, we've got access, we're privileged, we have all our needs met, we're able to kind of pursue things that matter to us because of that, right? So that's why we're in this sector, and many of us are in this sector as a result of that. But it is the masses, it is the 90% of the community that really needs to shift. And as you say, it is something that all of us need to be doing, right, wherever we are. So in terms of why we're not seeing that shift, it's because too many of us are still not protected. There's still basic needs unmet. Big gap there, right? And then the second bit, which is in terms of is there that skill set and what can we do? I think it comes down to innovation. It's this thinking we have that somebody else will fix it for us. So if we're seeing that the remaining 90% isn't responding, what is that extra 10% doing, right? People like us, people like you and me, people in the middle class, why aren't we investing more than what we already have to be able to address that? And the answer is because we think somebody else will fix it. Yeah. We've got that view that, actually, like, I'm a banker, I don't think I've got the skill set to do that. That's somebody else's job. Somebody in the policy is those 5 people who sit. They don't know that 5 people are sitting in this ministry, right? And the only reason I know that all of us have to do it is because I remember when I ended up at the UN and thinking, this is where all the decisions is made. These are the decisions are made. This is where everybody's going to save the world. I remember sitting there watching 200 negotiators or so argue about the definition of forest, and I'm just like, this isn't going to move things fast enough. And I remember coming home thinking, like, I got to do more, right? But I think too many of us are blind to the fact that the problem doesn't reach us. So when we throw our trash in the bin, it's out of sight, out of mind. We don't know where it goes. We don't care about that. Like, somebody else is going to pick it up, and we pay for somebody else to solve that problem for us. And again, like, so we can return to this, why policy is so important, why policy cannot keep subsidizing these problems for people so that we have blinkers on. We need to pay real prices. We can't absorb, the environment cannot keep absorbing these externalities for everybody else, right? So that's, we can have a whole conversation on that. But I think going back to talent, what I think everybody needs to realize is that all of us, no matter where we are, can actually make a difference for climate. And it could be, something as simple as the way you raise your children, or the way, whether or not you have children at all, or even things like eating beef and all that sort of really granular individual stuff, which, I have family members who say, I'm not going to make a difference, even if I don't eat this piece of beef. I'm just one person, right? But then, 26 million people say that in KL, and then where does that leave us, right?
Making fertility choices and contributing to population overreach.
Yeah, but I think essentially it's this recognition that decentralization needs to happen. That I believe that I've been thinking of this for the last 10, 15 years or so. A big part of where the solutions need to come from is decentralization. The decentralization of our education systems, putting power back into the schools. If you are a school on an island, your kids or your students need to understand their relationship with the land, their relationship with what their economic systems would look like, where their food supplies are going to come in. I go to Tioman every year, and I remember thinking like how expensive it was. And when I asked the local people, they say, oh, it's because we should get everything from the mainland. And I'm like, wow, how many months can an island like Tioman survive if they were cut off from the mainland? If they have resilience systems that allow their community to thrive and be resilient. And so it goes back to talent, right? The reason why we are where we are is because we're not investing in the right things, because we're not empowering people to believe that wherever they are, whether you're an investment banker, whether or not you work in, you own a shop or you run a cafe, or we're not telling that, or you're a mom and you're a homemaker. It doesn't make our system doesn't allow them to believe that they are capable of adding value to their communities, because they think that it's somebody else's problem. So this is the way we've designed our systems to isolate. We cut it up and say that you're for this. We don't see ourselves connected. We don't see ourselves as part of that system, which is a really key part of the problem.
I really like that point that you brought up, which is, looking at communities and decentralizing parts of, especially education, right? Yeah. So given this huge budget in education, what I would like to see, Khairun, you share your ideas as well, is to see more budget put into giving that experiential component for young school children to be able to go out and be in nature, and to understand the ecosystems that we are living in, to be able to know that, oh, today, the river is flowing, and it's not dried up, it's clear, and these are, the animals living surrounding this forestry or that particular river, and there's some form of data collection that's being done by our little stewards of natural resources, right? Young children at school is going out on a school field once a week, kind of thing, coming back, taking those data, pushing that data into the cloud, where you've got a systemized or centralized system that's collating all this data, AI, etc., whatever. And then at any point of time, whenever there's changes, right? Oh, the water's drying up, the water level is not, this is actually being recorded, right? And the moment this gets fed up there, and then you've got a central system, people of team who's actually analyzing this data and saying, hey, this sungai in Pahang was actually, at this level, and now it's kind of gone down. Hey, what's going on? Let's check it out. Oh, maybe there's some illegal logging that's happening right at the top of the peak of the hill, and that's why the water's drying up. So these little things can be done already at such a granular level, as you're saying, and then you can share with, then the students will understand what it means by having your own food, securing your own food for my area, and can we live if we were cut off from the central or mainland, right? What does that mean? So these are the kinds of things which government can do and already start thinking about rehauling the education system. And then going on to the point of talent. So you're saying, how some of the areas which we are now, like, which I mentioned, which is about, channeling people to go through this IR 4.0, digitizing the economy, putting people on platforms, online platforms, etc. But how do we grow that 5 to 6 pool of people that's sitting on an administrative or the part that's looking at climate change, right? Do they really need to go through 4 years of studies before they can actually be part of the team? I don't think so. You can create, a sustainability school that people can go through for a few months, just like vocational training, to help them get that into the mindset. And as part of the budget, the Kuzafu yesterday mentioned that they're going to hire 50,000 more employees into the civil service, right? So this is the part where you should think about, who are you hiring, what sort of talent, what do you want to put them through? With all due respect to all the institutions and agencies in Malaysia that's trying to do all this upskilling and reskilling, etc., I just feel that the focus is and priorities are not correct because we don't have a vision, as you mentioned before. Straight up, right? Straight up, no vision. So that's it about talent. Thank you for sharing with us a bit more, Khairun, on that. And also, if this fund that you are managing has a portion to help build talents, create a pipeline of talent pool that can actually sit under sustainability, because it's such a huge topic on its own. But then having the branches, etc., then you can think about what an academy would look like, what a sustainability school would look like. That would be a very interesting an idea to think about as part of funding the talent, because as we know, despite the fact that the private sector is spearheading, the initiatives and trying to push into decarbonization, etc., still within the private sector, my experience as being part of the work that I do on a daily basis, we don't have sustainability talents. People are still figuring out what sustainability really means, right?
Yeah.
And even the words and the usage of CSR, what does that really mean, right? You're not supposed to maximize your profits, extract and pillage, and then, oh, by the way, we've got some extra. Let's help a community over there. It doesn't work that way. So it is business models that we should really think about.
Yeah. So I think I'll start with the last bit, which is basically like what sustainability is, right? So what you've mentioned was philanthropy, CSR. So a lot of organizations have already, this bit, I've got extra. What do we do with this money? Let's take a nice check, a picture of the check that we give to an orphanage. So that was what CSR was maybe 15 years ago. What sustainability is today really is, like you said, it's strategy, it's business strategy. So when I was at PwC, a lot of my work was about helping companies align their businesses to that, and companies are getting it. I do think that my worldview is a little narrow because the companies that do have access to PwC services are very premium and blue chip. So the more often than not, you'll get a lot more organizations that still struggle to understand what it is. It is an evolution. We can accelerate that transition faster with the right regulation. So yes, that's something to look at. In terms of schooling, I thought that's the most interesting bit. And I've been doing a lot of this work for a long time now. So my kids, when they were, I've got a 6 and 8 year old now, but when we were in London, they were in forest school. So they did forest school once a week in kindergarten, and they do exactly the kind of stuff that you've talked about, right? And so I've got a video of my 3-year-old making fire for the first time. They'd go out, rain or shine. That's what forest school is, where they put on their rain boots and rain trousers, and they go out, and the kids are given like these little flags to say that, okay, yellow flags are for boundary, red flag is for danger. So every time we go, we just go to this little community garden at the back of the kindergarten, and every time they go, the boundary gets bigger. They get more comfortable in their space, and it's wonderful. I can talk about it at length. But I'm also very familiar with Green School Bali. It's sort of where I want my kids to end up, and it's exactly what you've talked about, where every single classroom, from child all the way up to 17-year-olds, will have their own garden. They also have themes over the year. I remember when I went, the theme was the Bali starling. So kindergarten kids or primary school kids would be drawing, looking at like how many legs they have. The older kids would be looking at things like migration patterns and breeding and things like that. And it was endangered, and they actually have an enclosure there that they teach kids how to, scientists from all over the world came to increase the population of the barley starling. And I remember going, and there were these structures that were built like bridges, where 17-year-olds were building bridges with engineers rather than I remember when I was 17, I maybe built a birdhouse at best, and like these kids are freaking building like structures, right, that people use that need to be safe. So you're right in terms of capabilities. Our kids are able to do it. They can do all those things you've talked about, and I over the last couple of years, I do this for fun. When I travel abroad, like I'm very intentional about what I want to do. So the last trip I went, I was in Bangkok, and I volunteered my time for this organization called, for this gentleman named Michai, and he runs Cabbages and Condoms, and which is a restaurant, but also a number of other resorts off in Pattaya and things like that. So I would typically say, I've got a couple of hours a day, you know, I'm a lot more value to you than just handing out flyers. What can I do to actually help your organization in terms of sustainability strategy? So I do this when I travel. I guess this is what I'm saying. It's like everybody has that capability and capacity to leave wherever they you know, wherever they are a little better. But Michai also runs a school called the Michai Bamboo School. And this school is about 4 hours out of Bangkok. And it's amazing. It is this, so it's only for poor Thais. And it is to raise a good Thai child. And the way, so the payment for the school to attend is that you need to plant 400 trees, and you need to do, I think, 400 hours of community service, and the children decide on everything. They decide on like raises for teachers, bonuses. They have to sign off when a building is being built. They have entire ownership over the school. And he, you know, as part, like every child needs to spend once a week on a wheelchair, once a week blindfolded. So it builds empathy. I know what it's like for somebody who has less than I do and doesn't have access to, you know, like to be able to see or walk. And as a result, it's changed the community. So when they had first founded the school, you know, it's sort of like normal pavements. But when kids started using the wheelchair, then they adjusted so the school can make space for students who are, and nobody's on a wheelchair. It's just, the point is that they make kids do it and blindfolded. So you'll see kids like just walking around with walking sticks, because today was their turn. They need to spend half a day blindfolded. So it's really, it's you're right. There's lots of really really good things to teach our children. The keystone here, the cornerstone is ownership. Is allowing and empowering the child to be able to express what they need. And it's even more basic than environmental education today. It's about them believing that they are worth something, that it's not this box that the school systems in Malaysia have put them in. And my kids go to the normal school system, and I can tell you how much my son struggles, just because it's a very one-way system. My child isn't allowed a voice. Yeah, if he wants to speak up, then he will get in trouble for it. What's really tough is that they're not allowed to socialize. And I tell him it's fine for you to get in trouble if you're talking to a friend, because no job I know will require you to work alone in a silo by yourself. So it's good that you're going out there and like figuring out how to make decisions, figuring out how to agree on something. Your social skills are incredibly important. And to be honest, even sustainability education, unfortunately, we might have missed the boat on that, because what our kids need to know now is survival. They need to have survival skills, and a lot of these survival skills is dynamism, is agility, is being able to make decisions in times of conflict. It's being able to disagree in a very in a safe way. They need to be able to make decisions in a group, in a community. They need to be able to know what to do when times are difficult, when there's no when the conventional job isn't out there for them, where, you know, we're very used to sort of set job descriptions where I apply for, but you're not set to that. You know, children need to know that they are valuable and they are worth something, and it's about the education system should be helping them find what they're good at and what makes them tick, what makes them who they are. We're not teaching kids how to physical education. Do they know the minimum amount of times, that minimum number of hours that need to be moving in a day to keep themselves healthy? Do they know what kind of food they need to be putting in their bodies? Do they know how to address peer pressure? Do they know what to do when they fall in love? You know, how do you resolve a conflict with a friend? Basic skills like those. So it's even more basic than even some of the technical stuff we've talked about, right? It's just about surviving now.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. I love what you've just said. And I honestly hope that someone from the Ministry of Education will pick up on this podcast, because there's just so many ideas in there in terms of, you know, what are the skills do we want to provide to our children? What do we want to nurture them? What kind of thinking do we want to have? I mean, you have to have those fundamentals first figured out, right? What do I want the young school children of Malaysia to become by the time they've graduated from primary school? There's a vision there. By the time they're done in secondary school, what is it? Then there's there. So, you know, like what you've just mentioned, in comparison between Bali Green School and the school in Thailand, they are, two complete opposites in terms of, one being a completely elite premium school, and then the other one is like, you have to be like a monk to want to enter it, right? So my question and my challenge to the Malaysian government is, why can't this be the norm for our schools? Finding a balance. Why does it have to be so expensive? I, for one, for sure cannot afford Bali school. I've been looking at it for years and years and years. Like, and I'm cracking my head, like, how do I put my children into this school? The school fees are cray-cray. So, so if you looked at the curriculum, it's not something that we are lacking of. We live in the tropics. We have access to the forests, to the wildlife, to the marines and all. We can do something like this, which is just a natural embedding this into our normal regular school system. Why can't we do that? So that's a challenge that I would ask. Hopefully somebody from Ministry of Education will listen to this and rethink about how they're going to be doing this stuff. So I know we're kind of running out of time, and I don't want to train our conversation, but let's focus on the second part, which I brought upon earlier, which is corruption, right? So again, we started off the podcast with so many positive thoughts because there's so many initiatives, developments that's going on. So given there was a recent book that I read that talked about how much this country loses on an estimation year on year. So back in 2012, what we lose in terms of like corruption was about 26 billion annually ringgit, and then today it's probably 30 billion. So with this leakage that keeps on going, and then I think there was another part where I was reading about illicit or illegal funds that moves out was in the trillions. So, have all these funds, it looks great that the government wants to focus on this new green economy, but then, not having the talent, still having lots of issues and political self-interest that we're struggling and battling with. How do we then ensure that these funds get channeled properly? What do we need to do as an individual level to amplify these problems, these challenges, so that our system, our institutions, our governance around it can strengthen?
So here's the thing, like while I follow politics broadly, I don't spend too much attention on it because I feel like it's a bit of a black hole. I feel like it's like it goes in there and you can just get lost, right? And corruption is part of that, is the iron law of oligarchy, staying in power for too long, etc., right? I think there are a lot of systems that allow us to refocus attention on what matters. Yes, corruption is a great injustice, particularly because these are taxpayers' money, this is our money, and we should be demanding that. There's a lot of work done there, but I want to sort of provide a different perspective to it, right? I think power is something that we give up. I remember the first time I voted, and I spent like a couple of seconds just putting an X on a ballot. And I remember thinking like, oh, am I giving up my entire right for making decisions just by voting? Is it enough for me to accept that this person that I'm voting for will be a proxy for every single decision that she makes in parliament? No. And I had to understand that I had to go through the experience to understand that. Like, am I giving up all my rights and all my power? Is that all I have politically? Is it all, is it all I have access to? And it's not. And I think it's this perception that many of us have, that we can't take it into our own hands. So I think in diverting away from let's put a lot of focus on where our tax base is, and instead hold governments accountable. Yes, we must do that. But I think it's also taking back some of that power and saying that, look, I can invest in systems that I have access to, that I can influence and I can control. What matters to me? It makes me think about things like, these huge systems like the palm oil industries, where we wonder, why are people willing to torch their lands, risk going to jails, just because they can participate in a capitalist system where they get peanuts for anyway at the very bottom of the supply chain? And it's because they give up their power. They say that I am willing to do this so I can participate in your system. When what they actually want, it isn't the money. It's not the money. They want social security. They want to know that when I go home, that I have food on my table, that when I get sick, someone will take care of me. And we've, by default, given up that power to do that to someone else. We have given up our power to grow our own food to the supermarket. I pay somebody else to deliver me, vegetables to my table, and I'm paying through that from there. But by going to a supermarket. But it's not entirely true. Like there's a lot of that we can take back. We can take back that power and say, let's take control of our energy systems. I don't have a choice right now, but to power my home from coal. I don't have that choice. Even if I drive an electric car, when I fill in, when I charge my car, it's still going to come from coal. But what happens if we say that I'm not willing to do that anymore? I want to take control over my energy system with my community. A bunch of us is going to say that, okay, maybe energy is a bit, some communities are able to do that compared to others if you live on an island, perhaps. But food systems is a great example, right? Why should I give up that right for getting this poor quality food to somebody else, which has, taken a cut from here and there, as a result, just so that I can have eggs today, just so I can have fresh vegetables today? We can reclaim that. We just believe that we can't. So it's this idea of allowing people to get away with systems that we've bought into, that we've invested in, that we've locked our development pathway on, and carbon's a great example of that. And all of the impacts of climate change affects the fisherman, it affects the farmer. That's who has very little choice as well, who not only cannot participate in the system, contributed very little to climate change. Corruption is exactly the same, right? The poorest, who contribute the least to the tax base, is the worst hit by corruption, because whatever flows in the end, they get that peanuts back. And to me, I think it is about reclaiming that power and saying that we won't give it up to somebody else. We can reclaim it. Education is a big part of it. We work with the PPRs, for instance, and we say that, okay, we'll give education to moms who have lost jobs, or people who've lost jobs. But what happens is that then they don't show up. Then there's this whole thing about not knowing. They have it's the poverty trap. The poverty trap has kept them from feeling that they're capable of doing something, that they are worthy. They don't show up not because they don't want to get their families out of poverty. It's because they don't believe that it's too difficult for me. Like I couldn't get out of bed today, or I'll just be late 10 minutes. It's not going to make a difference. It's become part of who they are. Like the poorest, we have kept them into this poverty trap that has been very difficult to break out of. So persevering that, and really, it's when we use the word empowerment, I haven't used it for many years since I was an activist, but not because I don't believe in it anymore. I feel like we've diluted that word. I think we've used it too easily, when the truth is, it's about returning that power to them. It's not my job to empower you, no, but you need to take your power back. What is your power? It's, if anything, I can help unblock those for you to arrive at yourself. And I think we don't do enough work for that. And I think women have that great role to play in terms of soothing some of that. So we've seen female leadership, intuition, we've seen the roles of light workers. We've got enough leaders in the world. We don't have enough storytellers. We don't have enough healers. We don't have enough people who are doing this light work to be able to tell the broken boy, this child that's struggling with anger, to say that I see you. And that makes a difference. It doesn't, someone who tells that mom who's just like, I can't do it anymore, who I have to work 3 jobs, I'm a cleaner, I look down because I don't feel like I'm worthy to be looked at in the eye, because everybody has told me that I'm poor. But poverty is I know it comes from a place of privilege, and I apologize for it, but poverty is really, it's something that it's a state of mind. It is not easy to break out of. We put them there as a system, as a community, but work that we can do to make that little difference. I even during the pandemic, when I was giving money, I also offered to give time. I said that, to this mom, I used to write for an organization called Marksheet, and they were collecting money for poor single moms. And I said, I'm willing to put in this extra 50 ringgit to donate, but I also want to give my time. I don't have a lot, but I'm happy to mentor another single mom who doesn't have, and it isn't so much of me giving, it's also me taking. She has a lot to give me too, in terms of perspective, in terms of tips as to how to let go of certain things, in terms of how to be resilient and face some difficult things that, I think so many of us are blind to. So we always think that we are at a place where we can give, but really it's not. It's about returning that power back. We have to give power back to people who we've taken power from.
I think that's very interesting perspective, Khairun. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And I think for politicians or people in the civil sector, public service who's listening to this podcast, you can take a lot from what Khairun's just mentioned. And to add on to some of the points, Khairun, because when you were speaking, it reminded me of like 2 points, right? The first is people who are directly or indirectly involved in corruption should speak up. Should be able to recognize that it is a form of rent-seeking behavior, that it is a form of cronyism, favoritism, racism, whatever that may be, and should be able to speak up and do something about it, and or disassociate yourself from that particular activity, right?
Yeah,
so
that's really hard. That's really hard. I mean, I can say, like, even we got a lot of privilege as boomies, right?
Yeah.
And when I think about the non-boomies cannot speak up.
Yes.
They will get shut down for it.
Yes.
It is us. It is the boomies who say, I think it's an outdated concept. We lose a lot more than we gain from these boomie privileges, and not enough of us do that.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. We need to call ourselves out, right?
Yeah,
we seek for affirmative policies, and we should not. That's an outdated policy. Not affirmative action for the majority, and you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah, so I think, politicians need to be brave enough to be able to say it, even if it's unfavorable, because it does demonstrate character.
Yeah,
and that's what we lack in our politicians today. I doubt.
And identity. It relates back to identity, which is going to be another session for another podcast that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And my final point is just on corruption. For the people who are the listeners of this podcast, a lot of them are youth, young people, and majority of them are also women. So my I think message is to say, if you know someone in a position of power or in a leadership position, you might not, and you are in that person's network, or you are the child or the son or the daughter of that person, you can say something, right?
Sure.
And you can influence that person.
Yeah.
And like my someone close to my network used to say, or now that I'm speaking about all the difficult truths, and people are coming to me and saying, how can I contribute? So these people who are coming to me are now pensioners, so they've left their leadership position. So he said to them, so what use are you to me now that you've left your position? It was during your time that you were in power and that you were in leadership position where you could actually make changes, was when you should have come and talked to me, not when you've retired, you become a pensioner, or you're like, oh yeah, now I've got some free time, let's give back to society or community. It doesn't work that way, guys. So there's a really, really important point that he made, which I want the audience to listen, and on this point of corruption. So thank you so much, Khairun, for your time. Thank you for all the insights that you shared. We've seen how all the talent and corruption, how it relates back to climate change and in our efforts, and time is running out. So there's a lot to do, a lot of work, and everybody can make a difference on individual level to create systemic changes. So I think with that, we will end the podcast today. Thank you again, and we'll definitely be having Khairun back on the next podcast session. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening in. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your friends. Be sure to tune in to the next episode, and to find out how to be part of Societal Shapers, head to www.plkadila.com and check out our coaching programs. Catch you soon!